am Richard Stanley. C'est moi, author, filmmaker, rogue anthropologist, paranormal journalist, and veteran of 1,000 psychic wars.
I want to invite you to a new world. To my world. A shadowland that exists one step away from what you take to be reality. A slide zone between fact and fiction. Fact and truth. A place where magic and miracles still hold currency. The other world lies sublime, out of space and out of time.
You're tuned to Tales from the Otherworld, and we're here with you tonight to continue our dissection of one of the most notorious books of all time, the dreaded Necronomicon. And here with us in the dark to shed a little light on the provenance of this mass-produced and highly curious text, we have occult historian Peter Levenda to tell us the true story of how this book came to a stand near you.
Episode 2, Secrets of the Necronomicon, Part 2 with Peter Levenda.
We're going to run with this as far as we can. So I had it. Herman had a copy. He had the copy, the original typescript, which I now have again. But he had the original typescript, and he had it underneath the counter in the Warlock shop for the longest time. Right? And some weirdo walked in, who was a complete comic book fanatic, called Larry Barnes, and brilliant artist in his own right, a brilliant guy. A UFO contactee, as it turned out as well, who was obsessed with aliens, obsessed with UFOs. When he heard that Herman the Warlock shop had the copy of something called the Necronomicon in it, he freaked out and on the spot offered him whatever money he wanted. He wanted to publish it. So that's where that happened, because otherwise it never would have happened. We don't know what we would have done with it after the originals, we think, are destroyed, and all we have is this typescript, but he decided he wanted to publish it, so we got contacted together, and I talked to him and I negotiated on this. I was afraid to give it up, and I told him some of the backstory. He didn't care, and we got a guy called James Wasserman involved in this, who was very deeply involved with the Aleister Crowley people and the Ordo Templi Orientis and Thelema in general, and he was deeply involved in that. He was starting his own book design company after working for Samuel Weisers for a long time. And he got involved, so the three of us were involved in designing the book and actually putting it to type and offering it for sale in 1977. So that became the year that all hell broke loose, because when we announced we were publishing the Necronomicon, you won't believe the kind of weird people that showed up and the strange mail we got and everything else. But a lot of people just demanded to be first on the list for a copy. And so Larry Barnes and I, we were just stunned by the reaction. And Larry just milked it for all it was worth, because he was definitely into the whole Lovecraft, shtick. I'm still there being the priest and trying to do some research and trying to study ceremonial magic and the occult and that end of it. But he's totally involved in, the whole universe where this is concerned. So and he was a heavy cocaine user as well. I mean, he was massive cocaine user. So in order to get work done, because his father owned a lithograph operation, the largest on the East Coast, in order to get this stuff done, he would just lay out lines for all the workers online who were printing these things to get stuff done way deep into the night, so he could make the publication date. So we were printing it in one place, we were binding it someplace else. He wanted leather binding. He went all out on this. I didn't care for his design necessarily. The first couple of editions were just too garish. I mean, they were too comic book looking, but that's what he liked. He was footing the bill, I guess. So we sold out the first 2 or 3 editions. And then came the offer to have it published as a paperback, which was just really weird. But we sort of, yeah, sure, an Avon paperback. Why not? We'd sell it in the airports. You know, there's your Necronomicon. Take it on the plane with you as you're flying coast to coast. So, and that worked, and that happened. The rest is history, I guess, from there. But the monks went to jail. They eventually did get out. They did federal time in Connecticut. Prosky's father, whom he made a bishop to keep the line of succession in the family, so to speak, committed suicide, hung himself in the church. The reasoning is a little vague in print, but I think the real reason is he discovered that Prosky had basically taken his pension. He had been a lifetime laborer in the Metropolitan Transit Authority and spent every dime of it. So his father, on Christmas Day, hung himself in the church, St. Andrew's Cathedral, as they called it in the Bronx. And it was a few years after that his son died, also under very mysterious circumstances. So that entire line was wiped out. I wish I could get more information on William Prosky's, the son's, own situation, but you can't find anything in the newspapers. Nothing has been mentioned anywhere. It's like he never existed. And that might be due to the Ukrainian influence trying to cover that up. I really don't know. I don't know if they had that much power, but it's very, very strange to me. So that happened, and then the 2 monks eventually got out, as far as I know, and living a very quiet life, not wanting to be associated with this anymore, as you might imagine. And everyone else, Larry Barnes, he died of a drug overdose in California. And the last person I think connected with this directly was James Wasserman. He died a couple of years ago of an illness. So basically, everybody who was, even people who were involved in the early stages of it, had some, had misfortunes that way. So it does have, a dead names ring to it, right? There were just a lot of people connected with it, and I don't like to say it because I would track bad luck, but I'm the last man standing right now. So I made it this far, but everybody else has had some issues, not directly connected to the book, but they were just involved with the book in one way or another. Prosky, of course, and his father as receivers of the stolen goods. The monks who actually stole them were fine. They did chime, but they didn't die. They survived. But the other people around this, bringing the Necronomicon into light, as it were, there were a lot of issues there.
Yeah, certainly I think a miracle, sir, that we're both still alive to be having this conversation, given the circumstances. Yeah,
I think so. Cheers to that.
Yeah. Yes, to it, sir. And Prosky may have been the man who burned the Necronomicon. We do not know what became.
We don't know. I hope he didn't, but knowing his paranoia and the fact that he was burning other books, and other people saw him burning the other books, it's quite possibly that's what happened. But I have in my heart of hearts the hope that somebody saw that box and, like a real Lovecraft story, saw it and saved it from the flames, and has kept it somewhere and has buried it somewhere, so that it turns out later. I have this hope that that's what happened, because that would be really fitting, that the one thing that escaped the flames would have been this manuscript that somebody saw, and is now they're in Nevada or someplace, and they've got it, and they're using it to win at craps or blackjack or something. I don't know.
Well, it often seems to me that at a certain level of initiation, key manuscripts just disappear into some kind of netherworld where they may or may not still exist. It's quite a running tradition. Here I'm thinking of like the third book of The Alchemist Fulcanelli,
right.
Gloria Mundi, which Canceller has in his hands, and then poof, it's taken back, and all he's got left is the top sheet, and he handled the manuscript. The so-called Wren parchments, the faded, the famous coded parchments allegedly found in the hollow altar column by Berenger Saunier that the Henry Lincoln, Basinton Lee decoded at length in the 1980s, but which no one's ever been able to find, or the actual original documents. There's not a single photograph, no trace of evidence that the original Wren parchments, the third book of Fulcanelli, or for that matter, the third book of Otto Rahn, the Nazi Grail seeker, who allegedly had written a third manuscript, which he describes, but which also disappears completely into ether. No evidence that it's actually destroyed, but no evidence that it still exists somewhere out there on some kind of library shelf.
Well, also in the Himalayas, there's the tradition of the Terma and the Turtons. The Turtons are people who discover a manuscript in a cave that was buried there by the sages 1,000 years earlier, and they come out and they release this hidden book. A lot of the Tibetan tantric texts are termas. They're books that were found, allegedly ancient, buried by a guru at some point, a Turton, or a guru, and they're discovered by a Turton, a person who discovers a terma and discovers this manuscript and then releases it. So there's a strong tradition of manuscripts that go hidden for thousands of years, are released, then disappear again, even in Tibet. So it seems to be a long-standing tradition somehow. Books that are kind of there and kind of not there. Even in Kabbalah.
This verbum dismissum of the alchemists, the missing word or the missing text, the key to the rest of the arcana. It's always perennially just out of reach of uninitiated eyes and hands. Yet you handled the original book and even photocopied it and handled the original pages, and so we have only your memory of the book to go by,
or the memory of the two other monks if they're still around. I think Chepo. I'm not sure about Chepo. I think Hubiak is still alive, still around. I don't know. I've never contacted him. From what I understand, he might still be alive. So he would have been, if not handling the pages, he would have handled the box. I mean, that it was in. He must have opened it to see what it was. So I'm imagining that he took one look and just gave it to Prosky. And then that's where it wound up. I don't think these guys are not that intellectual. They were not really interested in the contents of what they were stealing, or otherwise they would just sit there and read them, right? They were interested in just the physical facts of them. So I don't think they really spent a lot of time trying to figure out the books that they had. They would just recognize a publisher, they would recognize the date, maybe they recognized an author, and they would figure out what this was worth. They probably had contacts in publishing who would know. So it's possible the two original monks, if they're still around and still alive, they also would have handled the box and the pages themselves, I'm pretty certain. Past that, I don't know who else would have.
Yeah, but you touched it and handled it.
Right.
How old would you say that book was, and where do you think it might have originated from?
Well, I was 22, 23 when this was happening. I had not had a college education at that point. Just barely got out of high school. Created a church, but would not have been the kind of person you would go to say, how old is this document, right? It was damn old. It was old, we know. I mean, older than the books that were in Prosky's possession. And those books were 15th century, at the oldest, 15th, I would say the oldest, 14 something to 15 to 16. So it was older than that paper. And it was not printed, it was handwritten. So it's a manuscript, so that throws you off a little bit as well. People who looked at the Greek said it was a form of Greek that could have been, 8th, 9th century style of Greek with some of the stylish flourishes of that period, some of the arcane vocabulary. of that period. So we're looking 8th, 9th century maybe, as the earliest possible, I think. But it might have been later than that, just hand copied from something that was that old, because it was kind of a bunch of papers. They were not that large, as far as they were not big sheets of paper like this. They were small sheets of paper, smaller. I would say, what do you call it in Great Britain? A11 or something? I mean, legal size we might call it here, something around that size of paper. Handwritten in Greek letters. So, your guess is as good as mine at that point. The people that looked at it said it was probably 8th to 9th century.
And sadly, no one got a photograph or any record of the book's passing. Which, brings us to the weirdest part of all this, which is that Lovecraft dreamed the book. And I kind of believe Lovecraft's account of how it happened, that he saw the book in the dream and dreamed this name, Necronomicon. I'm sure you've read Lovecraft's account by now of how he dreamed the book.
Certainly.
Which and that's clearly Lovecraft's account of the Necronomicon predates the discovery of the book in the 1970s.
Sure.
So it leaves us with the conundrum that did the book already exist and was so powerful that it came into Lovecraft's dreams? In which case, do we have to take everything else that Lovecraft dreamed equally seriously, and does all the rest of that stuff really exist? And on the other hand,
well, he dreamt the name for sure. We know the name because of Lovecraft, not because of the manuscript. So we know the name for that reason. But if you compare the text of the Necronomicon with Lovecraft's stories, there's not a lot of crossover.
Yeah.
And one of the arguments I've often made, people say, well, it's a hoax document and everything else. I said, if it was a hoax, we would have done a better job. We created an entire church to get out of Vietnam. If we wanted to create a hoax Necronomicon, we would have paid attention and made a hoax Necronomicon. But this isn't. There's just not a lot of crossover. So my feeling is that Lovecraft dreamt it because it did exist, but he dreamt the name. And the name was so evocative, the title was so evocative, that bits and pieces of it sort of percolated in Lovecraft's imagination, and he created this mythos around it. Because of, like you might do if you saw it in a library somewhere under lock and key, and there was this really mysterious, spooky book, and you looked at it like something out of the Ninth Gate, right? And you just started developing this story around this whole mythos around it. And I think that might have been what happened with Lovecraft. He dreamt it, he saw the name. It's kind of a name that makes sense in Greek. So it's like, well, why not? Why wouldn't there be a book called Necronomicon anyway? The funny thing is, we've never found one except this one, right?
It brings us back to this issue of the slide area between fiction and reality, or between, I guess, some fact and truth. But it's just equally possible that the Necronomicon kind of compelled itself into existence. It was a book that wanted to exist, or needed to exist, and kind of manifested itself, because it's certainly super bizarre how it turned up at the time it did.
Well, I think you're onto something, because the Necronomicon to date has been treated as this artifact. But what if it's more than an artifact? What if it's a character in its own right? What if it's as much a spiritual entity as Cthulhu or as any of the Lovecraftian entities are? It just takes the form of a book, right? So it appears and disappears that way.
Yeah, and these entities are in fact trying to dream themselves back into our existence.
The way the Necronomicon did, right?
Yeah, either that, or the mythos, the Necronomicon, Great Cthulhu, and the whole mythos has spread like a religious meme. It's pretty much throughout our society and technosphere, and as if the old gods are determined to dream themselves back into reality. It's very odd to me that Lovecraft's work is having this bizarre 21st century second coming, that so much of it is landing in the present day. And I get the impression that Cthulhu and the Necronomicon and the old ones are coming. What through one form or another, it feels as if it's determined to manifest itself with the announcement that James Wan is now going to take a tilt at Call of Cthulhu. It shows that the studios are finally getting behind the idea of bigger Lovecraft movies. If Del Toro finally moves on Mountains of Madness,
right,
we may be at the beginning of a boom in Lovecraft material, despite determined attempts to keep it down, despite the best attempts of, say, Jeff Vandermeer, the Annihilation writer, to cancel Lovecraft and try to stop the meme from spreading. Right. You can't cancel Cthulhu. You can't keep deep ones down. It's going to re-emerge in a thousand different fantastical forms, like an idea that's time has arrived. And the Necronomicon feels like a book that, even if it didn't exist, was going to force its way into our existence anyway.
Well, and I think at the same time, what's going on is we're having this tremendous resurgence in it. Well, not a resurgence, a growing acceptance of the UFO phenomenon, to the point where this would have been unthinkable even 50, 60 years ago, even 30 years ago. But now we're discussing this in Congress, and there's tremendous fighting going on over it. But it's now become kind of an accepted fact, right? And I think the Air Force has just announced they've created a system, I think it's called Gremlin, which is going to be a system for recording UFOs by the Air Force or by military aircraft, a system for doing that and for recording characteristics, flight characteristics and everything else, heat signatures maybe, or things of that nature from these craft. I mean, they're taking it seriously to the point where they realize this is a national security problem potentially. But I think it's more than that. It's not just the nuts and bolts craft that concerns me. It's the consciousness aspect of it. Is the Lovecraft resurgence and the UFO resurgence coming together? Is this one thing and not two? Or these?
That's one thing, sir.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
I think there's a growing acceptance that human affairs have been interfered with by ultra-dimensional alien gods or alien deities or think forces beyond our consciousness, probably since forever. But I think the two things are probably the same. It implies some kind of consciousness outside of our paradigm or outside of beyond our human ability to perceive, which is has been manipulating and interacting with us in different ways for a while, and it sure feels like the old ones are about to show their hand.
I think I wrote about it in my trilogy of novels based on Lovecraft, where the idea that at one point, maybe sometime in the near future, we're all going to wake up having had the same dream. And when that happens, then we know, Cthulhu is here. He's arrived, right? No matter what that dream happens to be. If we all wake up one morning and we've all had the same dream, something is happening, right? We're already on the verge of that with the internet, with social media, with a lot of other stuff, right? Where we're being anticipated. Our thoughts are being anticipated. Our searches are being anticipated. Our purchases are being anticipated. It's this burrowing deeply as a digital equipment can into our consciousness. And there was this one very strange experience I had about a year or two ago. I woke up having had a strange dream about something. I kind of forget what it is, but I wrote it down. Something, a piece of equipment or something appeared in my dream. I woke up and I get out of bed and I reach for my phone and I open the phone and there's an advertisement on the phone for the thing that I was dreaming about. And that scared the shit out of me, right? Because it was something bizarre. It wasn't like I was dreaming of a hamburger and there's a hamburger ad. It was something unique, something that I would never ordinarily think of, but I dreamt it. And then I saw the ad for it. And I'm thinking, well, what the hell does this mean? You know, is the algorithm that good, you know, or that bad? I mean, what does this really mean? And that was, you know, this was my phone was dreaming my dream, and that was very. I was out of it for a day or two trying to get my head around it, and I couldn't. I mean, it was a fact. It happened, and we all have experiences similar to that. We'll talk about something and see it. We know why that's going on, but to dream it and see it, that was spooky. And because it was so bizarre, such a strange implement that I dreamt of, that I saw that threw me. So I think we're on the edge of this. And I think that if there's non-human intelligences, and if the UFO phenomenon is a manifestation of that, then why not use what we've already set up, a global network of electronic media? What's the best way to interact with us without doing so directly, without landing on the White House lawn, but doing it through a digital medium this way? We will never be able to figure out that this is not coming from a non-human intelligence. We are now so used to thinking of artificial intelligence, and we're used to thinking of every other kind of algorithm out there, that when an NHI, a non-human intelligence, starts to talk to us through this medium, we won't be able to figure out where it's coming from. And it may be very powerful. It may be it may just insinuate itself into our thinking, but it's going to be there. And that's just an easy thing for it to manage, because they've already done it. They did it with the overflights off the Pacific coast of the United States, when the airplanes, the Hornets, were doing their training in the air. They're flying around, they're doing what they're supposed to do. They see these UFOs, a shower of them, according to one observer. It looks like snow flying, they said, snow coming down. There were that many of them. Then they disappear. And then as the planes are ready to meet at their combat access point, which is a point in space, right? A point in the middle of the air, of the sky, which is predetermined by a computer on board the ship, encoded and encrypted, spit out onto everybody's consoles by the computer on board the ship. The UFOs were waiting for them to show up at that point. They already knew where the planes were going to be. Everybody talks about the overflights and Commander Fravor and this whole thing that went on. That was talked about in the New York Times in 2017 and 2018, and on the news, all these tremendous experiences. The one thing they kind of gloss over is the fact that the UFOs knew where their planes were supposed to be when even the pilots didn't know until they got it on their consoles. How the hell did that happen, right? And that to me implies automatically there's already a penetration of our electronic media by the NHI, if they so desired. They have the capability to do that. They've demonstrated it already.
I've been thinking of it more in terms of, I guess, the call of Cthulhu being heard ever more strongly and through different media, because, over the last few years, in fact, I'd gone quite a long way down the lines of developing a Call of Cthulhu movie, which is something I've worked on, and had a script in a late stage of development for tackling Cthulhu. And now I'm hearing that the James 1 Call of Cthulhu may go ahead, but in the course of the last 2 years, I've spoken to dozens of different filmmakers and wannabe filmmakers who have Call of Cthulhu scripts, and full of Cthulhu projects that they've been developing. A lot of different people were had the idea about a year ago or 2 years ago that maybe it's time that we made Call of Cthulhu, and started sketching and drawing and planning and moving it forward. And there's some kind of counter force that resists and tries to block the project and keep it down. And there was a super big attempt to try to cancel Lovecraft and bring it down. And it's nonetheless it's moved forward. A lot of people were dreaming the same dream or thinking the same thing at the same time. I was just one of them. And
well, Lovecraft said in Call of Cthulhu, the first people to hear the call will be the artists and the writers, the musicians, and then the cultists, right? I think in that order. So the people who are in the arts are the first ones to hear the call. If you go and read that, it's incredible. They're the first ones to react to it. The sculpture of Cthulhu that was made in the story, in the short story, right? It's an artistic creation. He heard it and he depicted it in a plastic form, right? There was the statue. Now it's filmmaking, right? Is the obvious next step. And I think you're correct. And I think the Call of Cthulhu and the NHIs and all of this, it's of a piece. There is something going on. And I just hope the NHIs are not hearing the Call of Cthulhu, because then we're all in deep shit. But, that could be what's happening. In some way of looking at it, that could be what's happening.
Yeah, and it sure feels as if the old ones are coming back, and given the current shape of the world, one has to ask whether the old ones would necessarily do a worse job of running things. And I guess, alien or ultra-dimensional intervention or interference at the stage in human affairs would definitely be at least a colourful development.
Indeed.
Yeah. And just sort of running on that same thread, you wrote a book called H.P. Lovecraft, Kenneth Grant, and the Typhonian Gnosis. And I admit I haven't read this book, but I was wondering if you could make what your thoughts were on this parallel between Cthulhu and Typhon.
Yeah, it of course was suggested to me by the books of Kenneth Grant. I was just thinking about them as you were talking. It was Kenneth Grant who started tying Lovecraft in together with Thelema, with Crowley, with all of this, and building this whole universe around it. And he mentions the Necronomicon a lot in his Typhonian trilogies. That's 9 books worth, and he starts getting into the Lovecraft things more and more strongly as it goes on, and then he starts referring directly to the Necronomicon. I mean, the published one, and he's quoting extensively from there, referring to it constantly. He saw it as part of this manifestation, and so at one point I said, Kenneth Grant is unreadable to a lot of people because he's out there, and you have to kind of go with the flow when you read Kenneth Grant. You can't sit there and parse it too strongly at first. You've got to get the feeling of it before you can actually start understanding what he's talking about. He wrote sort of a James Joyce almost, a sense of just running on and creating this feeling of the Typhonian Gnosis even more than the intellectual apparatus of it. But that got me to examining much more closely the stories of Lovecraft, and the fact that Lovecraft was always very specific in his dating. He would say this story is happening on this month of this year. He was always doing that. He was very focused on that, and that turned out to be very useful to me, because I went back and I said, okay, Call of Cthulhu, when is this happening actually? I mean, he wrote it in the 20s, but when is it situated? It was situated in 1907, the first section of the 3 stories that make up the Call of Cthulhu, the 3 sections. It's in 1907, and in 1907, Crowley, actually on the specific month, day, and year that Call of Cthulhu was taking place, Crowley is literally writing what he called his holy books. And these books are the most sort of bizarre, unapproachable of his texts in a sense, and they are written in a Gothic horror kind of mood. There are dark obelisks, there's this going on, that going on, it's dark, there's tendrils, there's all this Lovecraftian stuff. But he's writing it in 1907, right? And in the midst of all these texts that he's writing during that time, a word comes out, and it's Cthulhu, T-U-T-U-L-U, which is an undiagnosed word, an undefined word. He tried to figure out what it meant, but it was Cthulhu. This was a kind of a shrieking call that was heard in one of these texts that he wrote called the Holy Books. And I thought, my God, Cthulhu? Are you kidding me? When we came out with the Necronomicon, we said that Cthulhu probably should be Cthulhu, as it is in that text. Cthulhu means the man of the underworld in Sumerian, right? Cthulhu was an actual place referred to as the underworld. Lu means a person. Cthulhu is the man of the underworld, which makes perfect sense for Cthulhu, Lovecraft's Cthulhu. So I'm thinking, Cthulhu is a lot closer to the pronunciation that we favored over the weird Cthulhu kind of gargling noise for Cthulhu. So all this started making sense to me, and I'm thinking there's something going on. We know that Lovecraft had heard of Crowley because of newspaper reports or something. There was a he kind of knew who Crowley was, but this was later. I don't think in 1907, when the story was taking place, did they know each other at all? Not possible. So something was happening, and I said, okay, let's take this a little further. What else is going on? And Lovecraft's very first story is called, I think, The Cave, if I'm not mistaken. And in the cave, there's a human who could be a beast or could be a man in the cave, which is basically how Crowley saw himself. He was called the Great Beast, right? So I started to see, resonances here and there between some of Lovecraft's stories and what actually Crowley was doing or writing about. So there's a zeitgeist or something that's happening. So I started to really look at Kenneth Grant's books, and I said to myself, how am I going to describe Kenneth Grant, his books, when there's 9 of them? They're enormous, they're very long, they're very detailed. Let me just focus on a couple of aspects. One was the Lovecraftian aspect. The other was some of the tantric material that he was working with. Let me try to explain some of what that was. Go into his definition of the kalas. What are the kalas? These essences that the female exudes, during the month, that the magician is supposed to be able to collect and use for whatever purposes. So I devoted a section to that. I devoted a lot to understanding the Lovecraft connection as well. So that was my goal in that, was to give somebody a gateway into the Kenneth Grant books that were not as trying as Kenneth Grant's own books. Once you get past volume 1 of the trilogies, you're off to the races with Kenneth Grant. So I wanted to make it a little easier, just a little bit, more comfortable to get into it, to understand what Grant is talking about. And I was roundly criticized for that by Thelemites about every description. The United States Thelemites hated me that I even mentioned Kenneth Grant. The Kenneth Grant people said, we're the gatekeepers. You're not really part of us. You shouldn't be talking about this stuff. You don't know what you're talking about. And so it was like that, but people who've read it, who don't have these ideological positions, found it very useful. And I keep getting compliments on it, that it helped them to understand a little bit more of Kenneth Grant. But the Lovecraft element is definitely there. And I can see where Kenneth Grant glommed onto it without even realizing some of these parallels that were there, without identifying them, which I was able to do just because I went back to the source and said, let me pull apart these dates, because the dates are incredible. They always refer to something real in Lovecraft. He's always trying to tell you something with those dates. So that's something to look forward to when you're doing researching Lovecraft. Take those dates seriously, because there's some meaning to it. There's some purpose behind it.
This concludes episode 2, Secrets of the Necronomicon, Part 2, with Peter Levenda. tune in to episode 3 for the final part of Richard's chat with Peter, where they delve deeper into the mysteries of the book and beyond.
You have been tuned to Tales from the Otherworld, coming at you from the heart of the Devil's Pentagram. This is your host, Richard Stanley, wishing you all a very pleasant journey home.
Richard Stanley's Tales from the Otherworld is produced by Nerd Horror Media in Los Angeles, California. Horror.